Right, so it is 2024. In 2023 I was trying to plant a tree every day, or 4 every day, here at my home outside Lusaka of Zambia. And so I'm going through section by section. I had 7 sections for watering, so I thought those would be quite handy ones for going through and checking how those trees are doing now that it's the year after my resolution to do that planting. So this is section 3. You can see it's fairly open. This is between the driveway, which runs along there, and basically this big stand of bamboo. There are some more open areas, so there is a bit of variation there. And on the other side there's a more closed area as well, which we'll poke into very briefly. But generally speaking, it's a much more compacted soil than most of the ones we have here. We are on compacted sand. It is less well drained in a lot of places, so there's a few things I added, sort of stones for drainage to the soil. And let's see if we can go through all of these before it starts raining. So first up, right on the edge of sort of entrance to this area, we have a replacement. So this was originally a Monun longifolia went in here, but unusually, because those are pretty indestructible generally, it did completely die, and so I replaced it with this Cycas thuasi, which is probably the best cycad for a very compacted soil. It's a very fast-growing cycad. It's the only cycas species, so that's the same group as the sago palm. That's a very popular garden cycad. So it's in that genus, but it's the only one in that genus that I know of that is in Africa naturally, at least in mainland Africa naturally. So this is definitely in Madagascar naturally, and probably natural in East Africa, possibly sort of ancient introductions by people, but it's a very fast-growing cycad. It should in about a decade be significantly taller than me if it's looked after. And yeah, so that should be quite resilient in this fairly acid soil from this pine up over here, and it will interact with this lemon. Both of those should provide pretty good pest control for each other because neither of them have the same pests at all. And the partner of the original Monun, because they were supposed to form pillars to sort of mark the entrance to this area, is still alive, although its Dracaena is not. So that is in here, and you can see this red growth is all new since the rains have arrived, so that's really good to see. And although I did think there was an aloe here, and there doesn't seem to be now, its little Calincobos feldiana, which can be a bit finicky without drainage sometimes, is alive. It's just finishing flowering, but the leaves are coming up nicely, so it shouldn't die back, which they sometimes do post-flowering. And just over here, which is kind of a complement to the grape there, which is really improving now. It's got a bit more density around it. We have an olive. Now I think this is actually Olea europea, not subspecies cuspidata, but subspecies europea, or one of the other ones, because I do have one that I'm fairly sure is cuspidata, having gone back and forth, and the leaf is quite different, but it is a variable subspecies. But it was sold as African olive, so I should probably believe that. The top did die back, and some of these leaves are a bit flimsy here, but you can see there's a lot of new growth coming on some of the lower branches where they're more sheltered and deep in there. It will be in pretty full sun, which might be a mistake, because although in parts of their range they do, not usually in sort of higher parts of their range and higher latitude and higher altitude, but we'll see how it does. But so far I'm pleased. Over here is something that definitely would like to be either wetter or closer to sea level. So this is an oil palm. This isn't this year's. This is one that went in a while ago. You will see in section 7 a couple that went in the same day I think as this a few years back, and yeah, having a bit more shade is really good for them. And over here, having just rained, so there's a bit of a break here, we have a little tangelo. So this is Citrus tangelo. So it's a hybrid between a grapefruit and a tangerine. And with this one, this is a Mineola tangelo, so there is a specific grapefruit and a specific tangerine known for that. But it's basically very, very high Citrus reticulata genetics, and it's also got this lovely little Citrus swallowtail, which is probably one of the parties responsible for the denuding of some of these tender leaves. Usually they go after the more mature ones. They're quite good at that, but I guess when it was very small, it was a lot easier to tackle small leaves. They haven't gone for the growing points, which is the important part, because when you have caterpillars start to eat those little nodules, which will turn into new branches and leaves, that's when you start to get problems. The ants will mess around with those for a bit while this gets established, but it should be big enough to cope with a little bit of light interference from them. And then just a couple meters from that, we've got what looks like a dead twig all the way up here, because this has died back, I think. But we've got the lively little leaves down here, so this is Terminalia manteli, so this is the Madagascan almond or Madagascan umbrella tree. This should eventually form a light canopy over much of what we've just seen, because a lot of this will do better with a little light shade, and these prune very well, so it won't mind being kept light. And then just here, which should also enjoy that, because currently it's really enjoying the shade of the grass, which will have to come back a bit so this doesn't accidentally get cut with it. We've got a Prunus persica, so this is a peach. This is the only grafted peach I've planted this year apart from a nectarine, which is technically Prunus persica, but you know, a specific mutant. This is one from Eastern Province, which should bear a nice big juicy peach, unlike most of the standard peaches you get in Zambia. But it's supposed to be a much more climate resilient cultivar than a lot of the ones you can buy in most Lusaka nurseries. And then over here we've got this little circle of saba nuts from last year, or triangle of saba nuts from last year, which actually they were planted just before the new year, so just before my silly resolution, but they should be surrounding this little chiku or chikotsu bottle, which is, as you might guess from the name, Central American. So this is Manilcara sapota. It's supposed to have a sort of honeyish, cinnamonish tasting fruit when it's mature. I've never tried growing them before, but it is coming up very nicely, so I'm hoping it's quite happy here. There was originally Washingtonia here, but that got completely toasted, and so yeah, although its companion plants mostly were fine, so in the middle of that void I planted this little guy. And over here we have our first native Bauhinia. So this is Bauhinia petersiana. So I've already on the previous two parts shown Bauhinia variegata and Blakeiana. Those are both Asian imports. This is a much smaller tree with a very different, much less orchid-like flower. Quite a showy flower, but not very long-lasting, unlike those two. But it's a lovely little tree. It had died back quite badly. It had lost all its leaves entirely, which is the same with the other one of the species I planted elsewhere. But it's coming back really well, covered in leaves now, as you can see. They're not nearly so yellow as they look on the camera screen. And then under this guy, so this is a big sausage tree, which has finally started to push through the bamboo that had been sneaking up on it. Under this one, as well as a few things in pots and a few bags waiting to be refilled, we have a somewhat chicken-kicked Livistona chinensis. So this is a Chinese fan palm. I've lost one of the ones I planted these this year. There were quite a few planted though, so one is not that bad, and that was the only one really exposed. This is significantly less exposed. You can see it's got the shade from the sausage tree and from the bamboo there, but it is coming up nicely. It's got a new leaf coming, it's nice and firm. Chickens have done their worst, but it hasn't been too bad yet. That has a partner which is slightly more exposed, which will hopefully start to sort of close off the sort of entry to the bamboo there, because we have a problem. It's very dark but also very dry in there because there's a sort of wind tunnel comes through, and so I'm hoping that by having a relatively broad low palm here, it will come. Something is burrowing there. That looks like a snail burrow to me, but yeah, but we have a nice little Livistona here. This one did get eaten back quite a lot, but the new leaf coming up is nice and firm. This was the last new leaf it had, which is very distorted. And you can see some beetles had a really good nibble there, but yeah, it's coming back up, so that's good. Over here we have Cydonia, which was the first of the really temperate fruit trees that I think I planted this year, which was kind of a gamble, but it's alive. It has been nibbled. There's a weevil currently doing some nibbling, but that seems to be mostly on mature growth, which I'm never too worried when things nibble at. What I'm hoping is that soon it will start pushing out some new growth. But I'm not seeing any buds ready to break at the moment, but it is alive. It's quite healthy and vigorous. These had got very droopy during the dry season, so that it held onto them and that they have been able to perk back up is really good, I think. And it's not too hot a spot here because we do have a relative shelter here, provided it can stand up to the wind. It's not in too much sun here, so I'm happy with that. And what will eventually shelter it from the sun at this time of year, when the sun does come out, is this little speckboom. So this is going to be a much smaller tree if it's not pruned, and both of them will be pruned. This will be pruned up, that will be pruned down, but this is a shrubby tree. It's native east and south of us. It's not native in Zambia as far as I know, but it's sometimes called jade bush. It's a lovely little tree, very hardy, very sort of cooperative little thing, and it's doing well. Doing less well is a peach that I planted here. It seems to be gone. The chickens had a good kick of it, I think. Buried it a few times with bamboo leaves, so I have replaced it with something who is looking perky. So on New Year's Eve we had this little Rolenia deliciosa, so lemon meringue pie fruit went in. It has added a couple of leaves since then. It's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm kind of unclear, just a little way away from that, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue one way or another, whether this is alive or dead. So up here is obviously dead. This is a callistemon, was a callistemon possibly. So this is a bottlebrush tree, one of the Australian myrtles, and I have very little experience with the Australian myrtles because they're flammable, so I tend to avoid them. But they're also very pretty and very good for the sunbird, so I thought I'd try. And it's still very firm in there, but unclear whether it's alive. But this yucca, which is in as its sort of insurance tree, is coming up nicely. I think this is aloefolia, but I might have got it mixed up with a cutting from a gloriosa. But we'll see. Anyway, those are coming along this little hedge. So this is a hedge primarily of Euphorbia tithymaloides, which is the devil's backbone, which is this stuff. It's a good biomass accumulator. There's actually some talk about it being used for biofuel because it's so easy and rapid. But inside that, there's a few little fruit trees I've planted over the years, mostly from seed. So we've got a little grapefruit and stuff in there. So that's actually last year, year before last. It's looking alright despite being very slow. That is from seed. It's very distinctive grapefruit leaf, so I'm quite confident it is that. We got a little loquat in there too. That's another one from seed. Is it raining again? No, it's just from the bamboo. But anyway, those are doing well. So I thought, well, this soil is okay for citrus. So when this little lychee here also got chicken buried to death, I don't think they actually kicked it. They just buried it over and over again with bamboo leaves. So I tried Fortunella. So sometimes this is included in citrus as Citrus japonica, but usually this is separated into the kumquat genus, so Fortunella, and this would be Fortunella margarita when they're kept separate. And it's not doing much growth. There are a few buds that look like they might soon, but currently it's just in a holding pattern, which is okay. It's quite recent that it went in. It wasn't long before the rains, I don't think. The rains might have actually started when it went in, but it's holding, and that's good. Another tree that's a little bit of a mystery here, right by where one of our big hybrid aloes fell down. So there is the base of its trunk rotting away somewhere there. It's rerouted over there, so that's fine. We've got a tree I'd never heard of before someone gave it to me. So this is Havenia dulcis. So this is the raisin tree, something called a Japanese raisin tree, but it's much more widespread than that. So it has an edible base to its fruit. Its fruit itself, as far as I know, is not edible. I think it's used medicinally and to make wine, possibly. But there's this sort of thick, sweet stem at the base of that, like you get on cashews. And this one can be dried and used in place of raisins in general cooking and eating. So I'm really looking forward to that, and it's grown really nicely, despite my having no real understanding of how to prepare for it. So I'm hoping this will do well. And over here is something I didn't really expect to be planting. So we've got a Pride of India coming up, which will have to be moved. Lovely tree, but they tend to get a bit crowdy. But this should be a Limonera lemon. So this is a cultivar of a Lisbon lemon. It's supposed to be a very heavy bearing, very climatically tolerant lemon, but I've generally preferred the rough lemons because they keep better and they're very climate tolerant. We'll see how this one does. It should be good, hopefully. And it's on a drip line anyway, so if it's not, it shouldn't be too much. I will have to keep it pruned because you can see this is right next to the driveway, and I'm very bad at keeping the Suriname cherry hedge pruned back. But hopefully this will come up with fruit all right. And we've got a tamarind. This one actually did flower, but it doesn't seem to be putting out any pods. But yeah, so this is Tamarindus indica, which is a name that bothers me a little because it's an African tree. It's just because Africa and Asia have very, 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 very old trade routes. This has been in Asia for a long time as well, but it is from Africa originally. But yeah, so moving on from that, we've got this little Dracaena marginata. So this is from Madagascar. It's probably best treated as a subspecies of Dracaena reflexa, but tends to be much more tree-like. It's a relatively slow-growing, pretty drought-tolerant, and seems pretty mole rat tolerant. I will eventually, once these are a bit bigger, take these off to keep it tree-like rather than bushy, because I do want it to be a tree. And that is going to be part of a sort of collection of Dracaenas, which went in on the 100th planting of Dracaena fragrans. So this is the other tree in this pairing. This is a Dracaena fragrans, which is currently not sprung back from the rains yet, but it's a lot bigger, so it'll take a lot longer for the rooting to sort of have a response up top. They did have sansevieras all around them, and on that one the only survivor is a sansevieria pearsoni, I think, which is a wonderful elephant's toothpick type. So this is one of the native ones, which sometimes suffers from mole rats, but doesn't seem to have here. The mole rats ate everything else under this one, but haven't touched the mostly native ones under that one. Those also have an Encephalatos ferox, which could become a tree one day, but didn't go in as a tree. It went in as a sort of birthday marker for the person who's nodded to and Pete's dragon, because Dracaena's dragon tree, yeah, he died a while back, so I thought a nice little birthday gift would be a weird spiky little plant that he would have been pleased with. But yeah, so near those we have a tree that isn't doing well. This section, although it's got terrible soil, mostly things are doing quite well, some better than I expected. This is not doing as well as I'd hoped. So this is an elephant ear calico. So this is Calico bihariensis, another Madagascan plant. All its companion calincos, both Madagascan and mainland, seem to be doing pretty well. But this itself is not. Its stem is feeding better than it was, because this was really soft the other day. It's still not great, so I might have to do a little snip further up and replant, because provided this is still alive it can reroot, but we'll see how that goes. I have had them rot at the base, fall over, and then get several before, so I'm not too worried. It's just a bit strange, because usually they're fairly indestructible. Less indestructible generally, and someone who I really thought I had lost. This is Hamilton, who is one of my birthday trees. So on the 31st of January last year I planted for myself 2 Mapani trees, because I was in Mapani house at school, so it felt appropriate. I'd never managed to find one for sale. I found some, so I bought them, and this one almost immediately dropped all its leaves and played dead for most of the year. But it's back. It's back enough that caterpillars have done a fair amount of nibbling, and there's a little frog hopper just sitting here on the branch. Do you see this little guy? This is Puphilus, which doesn't actually mean what I thought it translated to originally. A lovely little guy. They're responsible for the cuckoo spit you see on some plants, where little balls of froth. That's the young feeding, basically, deep inside that froth. But yeah, so he's re-leafed. He's lost a few of those new leaves, but he's alive and he's growing, so I'm happy with that. And then we've got, which will eventually be in sub-canopy of that, but Mapanis are incredibly slow growing, so it shouldn't be an issue. We've got a much happier elephant's ear calico, so another Calico bihariensis. You can see this is nice and firm. The trunk is full and thick, and yes, very bendy, but quite healthy. I did accidentally go through some of the companion plants with my scythe the other day, but this one should reroot from contact if it doesn't rot from being too wet. And yeah, pleased with that. And here, so this is going to be sort of dry woodland effect. So these are relatively close, but they're not fast growing, and they should hopefully get on all right. And none of them are going to be heavy canopied. So this is an Encephalatos centicosus. So this is the Jazini cycad, which was a massive entering of captivity for a cycad, when most of its habitat was swamped by a dam, I think in the 70s in South Africa. So this is a very common African cycad in captivity. It's a relatively fast growing one, should become a tree. 5 of the 6 leaves it currently has have come up since the rains, so all of this is new. That is the only original leaf. And it's, yeah, looking healthy, it's looking good colour. Slight distortion because presumably I didn't angle it quite how it had been before it went in, but it seems to be coping. And over here we have Aitken, who is Hamilton's sister, the other of the birthday ponies. And she is doing much better. She has had some caterpillar interest, and we've got someone currently pupating, I think, possibly, in this little curled up leaf here. We'll see in a bit. Oh, it might not be pupation, it might be this lovely little baby apricot spider just here responsible for this. But she's, yeah, again, she did keep some of her leaves most of the year. She'd eventually go leafless, but yeah, she's looking much healthier than Hamilton is. They are not a fast growing tree, so I'm not expecting them to shoot up, but she's actually outdone my expectations. And another tree here, with one of the aloes that popped up outside the gate, which I'm still not entirely sure which one it is. It's a lovely thing and it's doing well. Another tree that lost all its leaves in here, so this is the carrot tree, Steganatinia. This is another native, which is another relatively slow growing tree. I find they're actually not that slow, they just don't get huge ever. But they are actually carrot related. They get covered in big open white flowers, which is really good for a lot of the pollinators, and they're very toxic, so they're a good thing to have around just to sort of limit the overbreeding of some insects. And yeah, this is doing fine despite having been completely bald not so long ago. Yeah, but a while ago my father planted this line of Opuntias, which Aitken went into a gap of. Along that we have this little guy. So the Opuntias are finally growing, having spent a long time not, but in one of the gaps I put this little Portulacaria. So this is the speckboom, one of the various plants called jaybush. As not overly surprising, this little Stapelia going in with it doesn't seem to be thriving. The rest of the calincos and this little aloe seem to be taking well. But the little speckboom itself, despite going in without roots, seems pretty perky, so I'm happy there. And just around the corner, also almost forgotten, again in this line of euphorbias and calincos and a few other citrus have gone in, we have a Satsuma. So this is, I think, Citrus ex ungui. So it's, again, it's a cross between Citrus reticulata, which is the true mandarin, and a cross between more mandarin and a pomelo, mostly mandarin, again, as with the Tangelo. And it's coming up nicely, so this yellowish green growth is new. It's not, again, as yellow as it looks on the camera. This is an old camera and quite grumpy like that. That little bit of growth here is above the graft line, so that is also mandarin. Yeah, that's above the graft line, so that's fine. If it comes up below the graft line, it's usually rough lemon or trifoliate orange, and then you just want to rub it off while it's still young and tender. We're fine there, nothing's coming up below the graft. Anyway, carrying on along our Opuntia line, we've got another cactus. So this one is a Peruvian apple. So this is Cereus repandus. Usually four-sided. This one has gone five-sided, so I might have the ID wrong, but I do know that this one has an edible fruit because I took it as a cutting from one which had a fruit on it. And it's coming up nicely. I will probably need a clone from a different line somewhere to get this pollinated if things like the Jamaicaria that I planted in other regions won't get that done for me. But yeah, it's coming up nicely. This whole little darker green one is new post-rains, so this is the original, which seems to have more or less sort of turned off since the hot, dry season. Ow, my finger. This is not this year's planting, this is Ziziphus mauritanica, I think. So this is the Masao, which is one of the jujubes. And this had been entirely dead, I thought. Even scratching the bark down here, I thought there was no life in there at all. I was going to dig it up and replace it. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to that because you can see now the rains are here. This thing has become covered in green, lively life. So this has a nice flavoursome fruit. It's usually sold dried here, but can be used fresh to make jams and ice creams and stuff, and it adds a really nice flavour. And just over here, we've got various aloes that have gone in basically as holders. There is a fever tree there. I did think it was dead, then I watered it a few times this year and it came to life, which I should have thought of earlier. So that's an acacia. It's the only really thirsty acacia I know of. But currently it's again pretending not to be alive. But over here we have our little blood orange, who is a citrus which requires cold in a way most citrus don't usually, which is unfortunate here because generally speaking I try to keep citrus in a little bit of shade, and shade does reduce cold. We don't get that cold anyway, so I've tried to keep it directly above open, so you can basically see that gap in the bamboo leaves and I think brachystegia leaves there. And that should allow this to cool down in the middle of winter without exposing it to too much of the afternoon sun, because as soon as you go further west than that, it's very well closed in, which is the part that tends to damage citrus, especially on the bark. So hopefully that should do alright there. Currently, yeah, again, all this lighter yellower growth is new. This darker green here is the original leafing. This whole section here is post-rains growth, so I'm really pleased with that. So that's settling in well. So from here we're going to head into the more sheltered part. There is a single more sheltered part where I planted a Heptaplurum deep inside this bamboo clump. It took initially, then it started to wilt a bit as we dried out. And when I watered it, it did perk up again, but then it just kept getting broken by wildlife, and eventually it just didn't thrive, and I didn't replace it because of all the trees I have to cope in the middle of a clump of bamboo. You can see how dark it is in there. I did think heptaperm, which is the giant flower, it's an epiphytic tree, I did think it would be the best, but it and its companion plants just got completely decimated. We've got monkeys, we've got pouch rats, we've got a lot of birds use this space, and it does make it hard for things to get established, and it is also very dark, and bamboo roots are very exclusive. So yeah, if that couldn't thrive, I couldn't see anything else taking in there. I might try again with a few more in a few years' time once I've sort of dug down through some of the old roots, but for now we're not replacing that. But we're going into this area underneath this baobab, that Cassia senna over there, and the sycamore fig, and of course our lovely bamboo. This more sheltered area, not as sheltered as inside the bamboo, where we've got a little bit of a foresty bit coming up. There's a planted a Dracena studinary here a few years back. It died and fell over and then rerouted from the tip, and it's coming up again, so that's pleasing. But the first tree of this year in here is the soursop, muricata, which is coming up nicely. And then just over there, once we have trampled a few of these figs off the sycamore fig, they're not palatable, they are very, very foul tasting, but they're very good for the birds, usually. But yeah, over here we've got another Anonis. This is Anonis squamosa, which is the scaly standard custard apple, or coatzapotl. Yeah, this is coming along nicely. And just over here, looking significantly less nice, but hopefully only temporarily. It was, yeah, it's still alive down at the base. So this is the African milk bush. Currently it's the African milk twig, but you can see where I scratched it there, the white sap coming out. So that shows it is still alive in there, and hopefully we'll be leaving up. All of them, apart from one, I think, lost everything above here this year. So you know, doing better than some. And right next to that, because that's quite a nice toxic tree and it can be pruned quite a lot, and it's fully deciduous, so it works quite well weaving through things once it's bigger. We have this little gunda, or bird lime. Can't remember the proper name for that, but it is a very sour, very snotty, for want of a better word, fruit, which should be quite happy here. They do seem to grow well in shade. Whether it'll fruit well in shade, I'm not sure, but it's a good one for pickling and also adding to sauces to give them a little bit of acidity and tartness. And the original plant, the reason I decided to plant a whole thicket of plants in here, is this little Monstera deliciosa. This used to fruit when I was little, but I guess over the years this area's got drier and drier, and so I thought by bringing up a little bit of a sort of more foresty environment in here, because it was sheltered but fully open underneath, by bringing up some more things under here, we should keep it a little bit more humid, and hopefully this can start fruiting again, because it's a fantastic fruit. But yeah, so that's one of the originals in here. And then sort of zigzagging back and forth, the closest to that is this little Livistona. Again, it's pretty perky. It did lose a couple of its leaves in the heat of the year. It did go in with this little Pepino melon, which I wasn't sure was ideal here. This is a Peruvian fruit, and because those are high mountains but also very wet, it's kind of hard to give them enough light and enough water in a well-drained soil in our environment. But yeah, it's still alive. It has looked significantly better, but now we've got the cloud cover, it's really not liking the shade in here. So we'll see if it springs back. It can be perennial, but it was very much an experiment, and the tree here was this Livistona, which seems to be enjoying the shade very much, despite having sulked a little bit when the cassia and the sycamore both dropped a few of their leaves. And then just here, just outside the sort of splay of this fallen cassia branch, we've got this little star fruit. So this is Carambola, Avarua carambola, and this has one of our native aloe relatives in here. So this is a Lipophia, which is doing better than I feared it might in shade. So this is the sort of standard orange through white one. Should be quite striking when it flowers, if it will flower in this shade. But yeah, this did dry out a bit when we went away for a funeral, but it's fully leafed up again. It's looking really good. I wouldn't expect it to flower and fruit this year. I think that'll be a while, but it seems pretty happy. And just here, I eventually decided that everywhere needs a saba nut, so we have the saba nut, who is of course happy because saba nuts are nearly indestructible. And from there, yeah, let's head this way. We've got another peach. There's always a mystery when you buy a peach from a roadside nursery in Zambia, whether it's going to be a Davidian peach or a true peach. I do think this is a true peach, Cyprinus persica. Probably a clingstone, because most of the roadside ones are clingstone. There's a little flame tree has seeded itself in here that I don't really want to encourage, but we'll probably move it when it gets a bit bigger. Yeah, that's coming up all right. It got missed by this falling branch, so that is perfectly all right. And this will all break down slowly. I've cut a few bits off. A lot of the larger bits will gradually rot over this year. The termites will help and should feed the soil quite nicely, make it much better at holding moisture. Fallen branches are generally useful, provided they don't squash your tree directly. And then if we go past that, got another one that got a narrow escape. So this is probably the worst of the trees for this level of shade. So this is a pomegranate. So this is the wonderful variety. I'm going to have to do some pruning of that, get a bit more light in for this one, because this is the least light tolerant of the things I planted. It's more shade tolerant than this prickly pear, which is getting slowly sort of suppressed in this level of shade. But you can see it's not thrilled. It hasn't done any real new growth, and I do want it to live up to its name. So I will be doing some pruning in here just to let a little bit more light in for it. But less sensitive to low light is this little makrut. There will be the probably more correct name up on the screen, but I'm not going to say it because not great with Afrikaans heritage to say that word. But this is a lime that is mostly grown for its leaf. You can also use the fruit. The fruit is pretty good for cooking with. You can see it's wonderful double leaf. This hasn't put out much new growth this year, but the leaves it has got, really nice and healthy, and I'm quite happy with that. I'll probably have to take out the support soon because it's getting a little constricted there, and that might help it perk up a little faster. And then just by this chicken, as a good landmark, we've got a tree I thought I'd lost. So this little tragic leaf here is the first sign of a little Eugenia uniflora. So this one got the top bitten off either by a chicken or by, more probably, I suspect, a pouched rat, because they're both inquisitive creatures who just destroy on a whim, basically. But yeah, showing how tough they can be, this little guy has pushed up another little leaf, and hopefully there'll be more to follow soon. And we've got another little Annona squamosa, so this is the rough-skinned custard apple again. This one has actually flowered, but the flowers seem to have been given up on. They will flower at absurdly small sizes even when not grafted, so it's not a bad thing that it's dropped the flowers. And in here, among these lovely, so this is Polynesian arrowroot, so this is something that can be used to make a clear starch, which is great for thickening soups and desserts, especially desserts because it's clear. I just love the seed heads, they just look like so sort of witchy to me. But yeah, in amongst these we have possibly the perkiest of the lychee seedlings I put in this year. So all the lychees I put in this year were home germinated, and a lot of them got sunburnt, but this one has, it did get burnt a bit, but it's not really lost its leaves. It hasn't put out much new growth yet, if any. No, none yet. But it's thickened up really well towards the base. It's much sturdier than it was when it went in. And yeah, I'm really pleased with how alive it looks compared to some. And here we have a replacement. So we did have a Carpentaria here. So this is one of what we sort of do still, but it's not very alive. But yeah, so this is one of only 2 Carpentarias I think that I've actually lost. The chickens have done their worst to some of them, but mostly they've survived. We replaced this with the Lilium deliciosa. So this is sometimes called Annona mucosa, probably more correctly called Annona mucosa. So this is another custard apple relative. I've never grown them before, so I'm sort of trying out the shade, because friends of mine on heavier soil have them in very full sun, but they also water more than I do. But I'm hoping this will be fine, and it seems to be so far. And over here we have another Annona. Now this is a reticulata. You can see the much longer, thinner, and much more fragile leaf. They do seem to thicken up a little as they age, but they're generally speaking much softer leaves than the others that I planted. And it's doing really nicely, so I'm happy with that. Which is also true of this little banana, who did sulk, did get down to 1 leaf at one point. There's leafing up again, so this is the sort of ladyfinger type banana, so it's a true species as opposed to the typical Cavendish type bananas, which are a hybrid. But it is unable to be pollinated because the female flower is unreceptive. Well, it's not open while it's receptive. So yeah, it produces a seedless, sweet and quite small fruit, and it's my favourite banana, so I'm quite happy with it. It's the only one that seems to survive well here. And then as we head back past that section, we get to someone who will eventually block a lot of the light coming in through this way, because you can see there's a little opening here. I want to move that opening a little bit that way, with a little bit of pruning. But we have here a nice little jackfruit. So this is Artocarpus heterophyllus. This is another home germinated one, because we have a big tree and she produces quite vigorously. Not as vigorously as she sometimes does, so this year was relatively modest, but last year was pretty good, so we had a lot of seedlings. And yeah, so this was one of them. You can see it did lose its original head. This all died back when we were away for a funeral, but this green growth has all come up since, and it's looking pretty perky, so I'm happy there. And then, because the gunda, or bird lime, does require male and female plants to be around, we've got a second one of those, which hopefully will be a different sex. If not, we can always graft, because we've got a couple others elsewhere, so we should have at least one female, and then graft at least female parts onto all but one of the males. And then over here we have another Annona reticulata. Again, looking good, bit eaten, but looking good. And opposite that, tucked right into the prickly pear, somewhere down here, yeah, down here, and looking pretty good, not eaten from the base yet, which is what I was worried about. We've got a nice little Elea, so this is the African oil palm. It's nearly native, but in hotter and wetter parts of Zambia, and generally relatively low-lying parts, not exclusively. It does grow pretty well in some fairly high altitude parts of the Congo basin, Congo catchment rather than basin really. Yeah, it's alive, and that is better than the other two Eleas I planted this year. And then over here, this is, if I can remember, can I remember? Yes. So this is Bunchosia. So this is hopefully Bunchosia argentea, which is the peanut butter fruit. The fruit does taste more like peanut butter than I expected. It's with one of the Siphonocylus, which is a native ginger, which is looking really good, actually. And for some reason it's with some uninvited Lantana Camara, which is not welcome. From the same general region, and all of these are near tropical. But yeah, so this has been eaten a bit. It's got some new growth coming, and the leaves it has are pretty much firmer than they were when they went in, actually. They were pretty coffee-like when they went in, but they've really firmed up nicely, so I'm pleased with that. And not far from that, because these are all fairly small trees, we've got Tahiti lime. This has already fruited, believe it or not, and it's settled in. It hasn't done much growth since the rain arrived. It grew quite a bit before that, and it did fruit fairly vigorously. This is a graft, so that's not that surprising, but what is surprising is it had the mass to hold it. With the light levels low, it does look like it's flowered again and dropped all of those. But that's not so surprising. When the light picks up again, so dry season, it will be a good time for it to try fruiting again. And another small tree here. Now this is a nearly native. I don't know if it's actually native as well, but it's in southern and eastern Africa. So this is Dovialis. This is the Kai apple. And it hasn't done much growing. There's a few little buds coming out there with some new growth, which is nice to see, but generally speaking it's still very much the same shape as it was, but yeah, nice and healthy, so I'm not worried about that. Okay, and then we go back out into a slightly more exposed area. And palms I generally find get on quite well with cactuses because they cast a shade, but it's not so dense as some things. It's much more sort of layered. And once the little toadlets have popped out of the way, this is an edible date palm. Unlike the wild date, they do have male and female on separate plants, so hopefully this will be a female. I do have a couple elsewhere which will hopefully make a reappearance. They are slow growing and easy to lose in the first few years, but yeah, hopefully this will get some pollination and produce some fruit. And just over here we have another red fruited orange. Unlike the blood orange, this one doesn't require cold for the fruit to turn red and get its distinctive flavour. This is a Caracara, which is, yeah, pretty healthy. It hasn't really grown, it went in pretty recently, but it's looking healthy. And here, which will eventually shade that a bit, again is some fairly open shade, we have an eastern trialo. So this is Aloedendron barbarae, which has had a few name changes over the years. Can't remember what its original name was. But yeah, it turned out to have been double described, so I'm back to being barbarae a while ago. And then underneath, I'm not actually sure what this is. This is some sort of legume. I'm not sure which one. But in what will be the shade of that, and also the shade of this mango tree, we have another little Rollinia deliciosa. Because this is a mango tree that mango pickers often come to get from, I have put a lot of spiky companion plants here, and that does seem to have worked because people have been picking from this tree, and yet our little Rollinia deliciosa is nice and perky. So yeah, good old lemon meringue pie fruit. And then this is a poison pod albizia, which is a lovely tree, but I'm not sure that I want one here because they're also massive. And there's quite a lot here already, including this big old cycad of my father's. This is Cycas revoluta, the typical sago palm. Lovely cycad. But yeah, I'm not sure it will get on that well with this little albizia, but we'll see. Can always make good timber if it does have to come out. But in here we have another olive. So this is another one that was sold as African olive, but I think this might actually be European, because we'll see what I think is the true African olive in a minute. And then we're going to double back, not for the first time, in a moment, because we're going to miss a couple of things. But if we head straight past the raised beds and past this Madagascan pencil tree, which you can see is quite a different growth form to the pencil trees I planted this year. It doesn't go so well from cutting. It's a lot easier from seed. I do think probably the standard pencil tree is at some point a cultivar of this, but I really love the growth form of this, although this one has been sat on by something heavier than it wanted. It's looking a little worse for the wear as a result, but yeah, lovely tree. But somewhere in here, this really needs sizing. We have what I think is the actual African olive, because this looks much more typical of the leaves I can find for Olea europea subspecies cuspidata, which is, yeah, the African olive. This is perky, it's got some new growth, unlike the other one. You can see it didn't enjoy the dry season too much, but that can just be settling in. It's alive and it's well. Somewhere, we've got a few different things in here. We've got a little Sabanat from a few years back, but here we have a rough lemon, which spent most this year leafless and miserable, and you can see now is pretty vigorous and leafy. This got eaten right down to nothing, first by the citrus swallowtails, and then it got the woolly bears, which I really don't like getting on citrus because they do eat the growing tips. But it's recovered really well. Eventually I will take this down to a single stem because I want a tree rather than a bush. Especially here, it's just for access much easier to have a tree. But yeah, it's coming up nicely, having really looked like it might not. And then I think we're nearly done. Yeah. So having started this section with a pair of Monoon longifolia, one of which had died, we've got this little sort of gateway back onto the drive here. There is a little stone wall there, but again, I really need to size this area and it's getting lost. But in here we have one Monoon, which will be a pillar on one side of that, and just a couple of meters away we've got another one. They do have a little bit of growth, this one more than the other. You can see the red is new since the rains, but mostly they're just in a holding pattern at this point. But I have had them do nothing and actually look dead for 2 years before and then shoot up, so not too worried about that. And that should be everything for section 3. Section 4 is significantly shorter. I think there's only 16 trees in it, so that'll be a nice short one to edit and also to watch. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was a little bit more informative than just seeing a tree getting shoved in the ground in the dark. Hope I didn't talk too much, sorry. Yeah, tune in tomorrow if you want more of this.